Hello, and thank you for joining us for Why is Risk Reduction Important webinar. My name is Desiree Williams, and I serve AK Sci as a Digital Education Coordinator. I will be your webcast producer. Before we dive into the content, I would like to review the web-based features available to you. This webinar will be advanced remotely, but at the bottom of your screen, there are multiple application widgets you can use throughout the program. If you are accessing the webinar via a mobile device, you may need to scroll down or over on your screen to access these widgets. Each window on your screen also can be resized, moved, and adjusted to fit your learning needs. A copy of the slideshow and other additional materials are available in the Resource List widget that looks like a green folder. The group chat is available for you to interact with other attendees and the presenters during the presentation. When posting, it will share your first name and last initial, but please share your chapter and university as well. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the Help widget with the question mark icon. If you have a question throughout the program, you can launch the Q&A widget to submit that question. All questions will be discussed at the end of the program in the order they are received. During this webinar, we will cover an overview of risk reduction and why it is an essential part of your chapter operations. We will provide a high-level review of the risk management policies and discuss the importance of understanding those policies so you can help your chapter proactively reduce risk. For our program today, we have Carrie Dixon and Liz Vickers presenting. Carrie was initiated by the Beta Lambda chapter at Washington State University in 2002 and has served as a volunteer for AK Sci for more than 10 years. Carrie has served Alpha Kappa Psi as a member of the Judiciary Committee since 2016 and is currently the interim vice chair. Prior to working with the JC, she served as the fraternity executive vice president from 2013 to 2015. She also served as a chapter advisor for the Kappa Psi chapter at Central Washington University and served in various other roles supporting the student and alumni chapters in the Pacific Northwest region, many of whom she has mentored have become active volunteers in AK Sci. Professionally, Carrie has spent several years serving customers in a wide range of industries, including financial, wholesale, and hospitality. Whether at work or in Alpha Kappa Psi, Carrie looks to serve those she is working with. Liz is a graduate of Stetson University and an initiate of the Theta Mu chapter. While at Stetson, Liz studied finance and project management and discovered her passion for risk management through her involvement in a social fraternity. Since joining the Heritage Center staff, Liz has served in several positions within the student services area and currently serves AK Sci as the Associate Director of Risk Reduction. Residing in Central Florida with her fiancé, Liz enjoys traveling, reading, learning new creative skills, and hanging out with her two fluffy coworkers, her dogs Bailey and Wrigley.
As a member of Alpha Kappa Psi, or a member of another organization, you've likely heard the term risk management. We have risk management policies, webinars, and e-learnings, but now we've thrown a new term out there, risk reduction. What's the difference between risk management and risk reduction? According to the Project Management Institute, risk management means, quote, identifying and assessing project risks, mitigating threats, and capitalizing on opportunities. The International Risk Management Institute defines risk reduction as, quote, a technique of risk management focused on putting measures in place to reduce the frequency or severity of losses. What this means is risk reduction is a crucial component of risk management, and the two go hand in hand. Risk management focuses on identifying and assessing levels of risk before they happen, and risk reduction then uses that information to develop processes and establish measures that will mitigate the identified risks. We'll talk about risk reduction's implications as it relates to Alpha Kappa Psi specifically a little bit later, but let's delve into its overall importance a little bit further.
As you listen to the definitions, some of you may be wondering whether all the effort is worth the result. Assessing and analyzing events, reviewing your policies, setting up preventative measures, all of that can take a lot of time. Why should we spend the time and energy up front when nothing ever happens anyway? If you haven't found yourself in a risk management situation, it's probably because your officers have been doing a good job at risk reduction without you realizing it. At the chapter level, focusing on risk reduction can save you money. Should something happen, the chapter can be found liable and held responsible for any charges incurred. These charges can come from the fraternity. One way is to cover the cost of an investigation, and two, in the form of higher insurance costs. Costs can also come from outside parties. If an incident were to occur, the chapter would be required to pay damages, such as medical bills due to an injury or legal fees associated with any legal action taken against the chapter. Most often, chapters don't have enough savings to afford these increased fees, so then it falls to each member of the chapter to pay increased dues to cover costs. For example, if a chapter is investigated and found responsible, probation can include an insurance surcharge of up to 200%, making an insurance payment of $30 increase to $120 per year, in addition to regular member dues. Financial reasons aside, risk reduction can impact your personal health and safety. As we've seen far too often in the news, small lapses in judgment can lead to serious consequences, such as injury and even death. Taking the time to plan ahead, prepare appropriate measures, and educate your members on proper procedures if an incident occurs can make all the difference.
So what does this mean for Alpha Kappa Psi? How does AK Psi as a fraternity employ risk reduction? Alpha Kappa Psi has its own set of risk management policies located in the Board of Directors Statement of Policy that are in place to protect your safety. The fraternity put these policies in place as a risk reduction preventative measure to help avoid hazardous situations that could harm its members. The policies cover alcohol and controlled substances, fire and health safety, hazing, investigations, publication of inappropriate materials, and sexual harassment. Each policy has guidelines to ensure our members are protected when it comes to these situations. Your university may also have policies, so know that as a fraternity, we hold our chapters to the firmer of the two policies. If your university has stricter rules regarding alcohol and controlled substances, we will abide by the university's rules. Additionally, Alpha Kappa Psi is dedicated to continuous risk management education. The fraternity has created several e-learnings and webinars, such as this one you're listening to now, to educate its members on the policies and proactive risk reduction actions the chapter should take. These resources span from simply explaining the policies in short segments to an in-person training at our fraternity-wide events. If there's a resource that you think is missing or a piece of a policy that you're still unsure of, reach out to us and let us know. If you're struggling with something, it's likely that other students are struggling as well, and we can work to provide additional resources for you. We are going to spend time today going through each of the risk management policies and what they mean, but know that they exist, take time to review them, and understand that they are an example of risk reduction efforts from the fraternity as a whole. Your chapter's regional management team and chapter educational resource coordinator can also offer support and guidance as your chapter gets comfortable with the risk management policies.
The fraternity created the policies, but what should be done at the chapter level to alleviate risk? Chapter members are expected to understand and follow the fraternity's risk management policies, but how do you do that? How do you ensure that your members understand the policies, officers and committees are considering them as they plan events and activities, and that the policies are not being violated? The best way for your chapter to practice risk reduction is by creating a chapter compliance committee. Does your chapter use a compliance committee? Compliance committee is a group of students from the chapter who are well-versed in the fraternity's risk management policies. They are entrusted with reviewing and evaluating all chapter events and activities to ensure that the chapter is adhering to the risk management policies set forth in the Board of Directors Statement of Policy. This includes ongoing events such as fraternity rituals and pledge programming, as well as one-time events. Rules, duties, and selection of the committee should be outlined in the chapter's bylaws and should be treated as any other committee that has regular meetings. We will touch on compliance committees in a bit when we discuss putting risk reduction into action. To avoid potential risk management issues in the chapter, the Compliance Committee should review the events and activities on both the chapter and pledge class calendars. The chapter officer or committee who originally planned the event should do an initial review to ensure it complies with all policies. And prior to the event, the Compliance Committee should complete a secondary review. Compliance Committee members can provide feedback and collaborate with organizers to ensure compliance and risk reduction techniques are established. Compliance Committee members should also assist with the planning, execution, and review of all events. During the post-event review, the Compliance Committee will evaluate the event with the organizer to understand what they learned and what they can do to improve in the future. If the Compliance Committee identifies a potential risk in an event and advises the chapter against it, yet the event moves forward without addressing said risk, it is strongly encouraged to report the potential violation to a member of the regional management team or a member of the Heritage Center. If an incident occurs, the Compliance Committee will act as representatives of the chapter if the Judiciary Committee needs information or investigates. To assist chapters in reducing risk at events, Alpha Kappa Psi's insurance carrier, Holmes Murphy, created an event planning app that is available for all chapters to utilize free of charge. The app is available to everyone in the Apple and Android app stores. Search for HM Event Planner. According to Holmes Murphy, the goal of the app is to help you think critically around event planning. As chapter officers, committee members, and compliance committees are going through the event planning process and reviewing events for potential risk, this app analyzes your event planning process and guides the user through a recommended practice. Remember to keep both the fraternity and your university's policies in mind as you plan and review chapter events.
In addition to reviewing events, chapter officers and committee members should compare events and activities to the fraternity's core values. Remember, our fraternity is based on brotherhood, knowledge, integrity, service, and unity. Everything we do, from our chapter meetings to interactions with non-members to events, should positively reflect our values. If an event you are hosting seems to ignore one of our values, it is likely that it is also ignoring one of our policies, so it should be corrected. Consider a football tailgate, for example. If your chapter decides to hold a tailgate with alcohol, it would be illegal and unethical for your members under the age of 21 to possess or consume alcohol, as it is illegal per federal law. Chapters may only have alcohol at events if it is BYOB, so attendees only bring the amount a reasonable person could consume in one sitting, or if the alcohol is provided through a licensed third-party vendor, which is atypical at a tailgate. The BYOB option significantly increases the amount of risk a chapter assumes and is more typical for tailgates. If a chapter decides to allow its underage members to bring and consume alcohol because it's a tailgate, the chapter would not be acting with integrity or within the risk management policies and federal law. Remember, perception is everything. How you behave and the actions of your chapter members not only impact the outcome of the event, but also impact what is said about your chapter and its members. Community members, university officials, and prospective new members are constantly watching what your chapter does and making judgments through those actions. If your actions don't reflect the values of the fraternity, it paints a negative picture of the chapter's brand and the fraternity as a whole. Risk reduction can play a role in ensuring your actions and the image you portray is what you really want to project to the public.
We established what risk reduction is and why it is important, as well as what it means in regard to Alpha Kappa Psi. Now, what can you as an individual do to be knowledgeable? You don't have to be a chapter officer to understand and take part in risk reduction for your chapter. It's actually the exact opposite. It's everyone's responsibility to ensure the chapter is identifying potential risk and using precautionary measures. The first and easiest thing to do is review the risk management policies each term. All brothers, pledges, and alumni who interact with the chapter should review the policies each academic term, even if they've heard them before. Whether you've heard them once or 20 times, reviewing the policies at the start of each term keeps the information fresh and on the forefront of your mind. Periodically, there are changes to these policies, so reviewing them at the start of each term helps all members stay up to date. Because most of the risk management incidents occur at fraternity events, it is important to understand what constitutes a fraternity event and when the risk management policies are in effect. It's also important to understand liability. In what situation is an individual person liable versus the chapter? Liability is not black and white, as it often depends on the situation. Liability falls on a spectrum. Certain situations can be distinctly classified as either a chapter or personal event, but sometimes it can be both. How the event was communicated, who financed the event, and when the event was held in relationship to chapter events are all contributing factors when determining liability. There are also instances where both the chapter and an individual may be liable. The sanctions are brought against the chapter regarding its pledge process and an investigation occurs. The president, vice president of membership, and pledge educator are often considered personally liable as well. From a fraternity standpoint, repercussions regarding personal liability can be removal from chapter office, suspension, or expulsion. Depending on the severity, however, action can be taken by the university or local police. We know that determining liability can be tricky and severely contingent upon the situation, so we've linked the What Constitutes a Fraternity Event webinar to the resource widget so you can learn more about liability. To educate yourself and the members of your chapter on risk management policies and liability, be sure you're aware of fraternity, university, and community resources available to you. All brothers and pledges should know where to go for information, who to talk to, and what to do should an incident occur. Alpha Kappa Psi often hosts risk reduction and risk management webinars and online training, as well as sessions at nearly all in-person events. Take advantage of these opportunities to stay knowledgeable about the policies and resources available to you. If all your members are unable to attend a session at PBLI or view a webinar, be sure you have a conversation with your brothers afterwards regarding what you learned from the material. Leading a debrief meeting like this can help you further digest and comprehend the information, relay it to those who were unable to attend, and have meaningful conversations around what you as a chapter can do to increase member safety during events. If your campus has a university programming addressing risk prevention, seize the opportunity to learn more and share it with your brothers. Additionally, consider partnering with another organization on campus or in the community to host an educational event. Risk reduction is not limited to Alpha Kappa Psi or even just Greek organizations. The entire campus community can benefit from education about risk and identification of available resources. As we mentioned earlier, consistent touch points are some of the best preventative measures in minimizing risk.
Understanding the policies is important, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't follow them. It is essential that the chapter not only learns about the policies, but also takes action to implement the knowledge it has gained. Your chapter should have frequent conversations about risk reduction. The concept shouldn't be seen as taboo or just another requirement to follow, but as a necessary discussion topic to protect your brother's health and safety. During these conversations, thoroughly review the policies and hold deeper conversations about the chapter's implementation of risk reduction measures and possible areas for improvement. These conversations are not reserved for the chapter officers, as all members have a significant role in risk reduction. Consider adding time to your chapter meetings to talk about this. If your chapter does not have a compliance committee, consider creating one. Chapters of all sizes have employee compliance committees because they prioritize their members' health and safety. Serving as a member of the compliance committee is an opportunity to look deeper into the fraternity's risk management policies and understand how the events and activities your chapters plan can be enhanced to reduce risk. Members who join the committee do not have to be well-versed in the policies initially, but as events and activities progress, they will build their risk reduction competence and develop best practices for the chapter. Working in tandem with the officers and committees as they plan the events and activities will also help members build their risk reduction competence and decrease the amount of changes required for events to remain in compliance. Throughout a member's time on the committee, they will also improve their resilience, communication, and decision-making skills. All members should consider every angle when making decisions. You have the structure of the policies and the tools to review them, but if you still have questions, utilize your resources. Your regional management team, chapter educational resource coordinator, the judiciary committee, and all staff and volunteers in the fraternity want to work with you. We are not here to cancel events or take away fun events and activities. Rather, the fraternity is here to get your events and activities from a no to a yes. If there is an event your chapter really wants to host, work with your volunteer and staff contacts to make it into a great event that adheres to fraternity policies. And lastly, watch out for your brothers and pledges and stand up for one another. No matter how much effort you put into risk reduction, incidents can still happen. And that's okay, as long as you're able to recognize it when it does and you don't allow it to escalate. If you find yourself in an uncomfortable situation, don't be a bystander and watch it happen. Know when it is safe to intervene and step up. If it's unsafe, know who to contact so the right person can. Listen to your gut and speak up if something conflicts with your personal or fraternal values, because it's likely you are not the only one who feels that way. The actions of one person can drastically change the outcome of a situation.
Before we wrap up, let's spend a few moments recapping a few of the key takeaways from the program. Risk management and risk reduction are two different things, but both are important to sustain a chapter's health and ensure the safety of your brothers and pledges. The fraternity has its own risk management policies, but as a chapter, you should strive to educate your members and review your events as a risk reduction practice. Doing the work ahead of time will be worth the outcome when your chapter doesn't face financial penalties and your members are safe. When hosting events, always consider the image you are portraying and whether your actions and the actions of the chapter are exhibiting our values. Consider creating a compliance committee to review chapter and pledge events. While your chapter officers should have the knowledge and foresight to plan ahead, oftentimes details can fall through the cracks, and a second set of eyes to review an event's plan beforehand could identify and prevent an incident from occurring. It's significantly cheaper to be proactive than reactive. Each of the key components ensure that your members feel confident in risk reduction and prioritize the safety of the brothers and pledges. Risk reduction does not mean you cannot have fun, but it is a serious conversation and practice. Taking the time to educate members and adhere to the policies and procedures can make all the difference to your chapter's operations and your members' well-being.
Thank you so much, Liz and Carrie, for providing all of that content. And now, before we transition into the Q&A portion, I want to review the key skills that they highlighted. By implementing a chapter compliance committee and risk reduction practices, chapter officers and members will gain decision-making and organization skills. Through reviewing your chapter operations and events to identify areas for risk reduction, chapter officers and compliance committee members will gain analytical and critical thinking skills. By discussing the policies and risk reduction techniques, members will gain listening and comprehension skills and confidence in their understanding of these policies. At this point, we are going to transition to questions. As stated earlier, you can launch the Q&A widget from the menu dock to submit your questions. If we do not get to your question, we will respond via email, and this feature will remain open even in on-demand viewing. So we have our first question. Is a compliance committee like a judiciary committee?
No, it's similar but different. That's Carrie. I like to think of compliance committees as a proactive committee. They're out looking to make things so it doesn't end up in a situation where you're having to be reactive, where a judiciary committee is something happened, therefore we've got to handle it. That's the easiest way for me to keep them straight. So again, compliance committee is a proactive, it's a risk reduction type situation versus a judiciary committee or a judiciary board, which is then dealing with if something happened. Ideally, we want to have more go through the compliance committee versus the judiciary committee, because if something gets to the judiciary committee, more than likely means it didn't go through a compliance committee or something was missed or, something went haywire somewhere. So the idea is compliance committee, it's proactive. We want to have things, just have multiple sets of eyes to try and prevent anything negative from happening to your chapter, to your members, anything like that.
All right, and kind of going along with that, my chapter has a judicial review board. Is that the same thing as a compliance committee? And can you also provide more information on a compliance committee, like who should be on them, what they should be doing, etc.?
So just again,
Sure.
say, go ahead, Liz. I'll let you take it.
No worries. This goes perfectly with what Carrie was just talking about. So to elaborate a little bit more, again, the Judicial Review Board or the Judiciary Committee is separate from that of a compliance committee. A compliance committee is typically a mix of 3 to 5 members of the chapter who have various experiences. They come from, various years at university. They may have held former leadership positions. They may be involved in different organizations on campus, but they're also an individual who can become familiar with the policies, or the risk management policies is able to look at an event or an activity from an unbiased standpoint and give constructive feedback back to the event planner of anything that might need to be changed in order to bring it into compliance. They should be able to look from different perspectives stemming from their different type of experiences. So I know that when I was in college, I was in a social fraternity, and I was able to use those experiences and bring them to Alpha Kappa Psi and be able to look from a different perspective. So that's a little bit about a compliance committee. You can talk about utilizing the event planning guide from Holmes-Murphy to also help with a compliance committee. That's a formal document that they can actually review the planning guide for the event. So it's just a little bit about compliance committee.
Carrie, did you want to add anything to that before we move on?
No, she took care of it.
Okay. So moving on to the next question. My chapter is relatively small. How are we supposed to have time to do everything that you guys suggested?
So this is Liz again. My recommendation is to take baby steps. So we talked a lot about compliance committees, and now we've referenced judicial review boards. We've talked about reviewing the policies every semester. And if you're in a smaller chapter, I understand that there's probably more workload share than that of a larger chapter. So like I said, take baby steps to make one change at a time. Perhaps the first change that you're going to make is that you have your committees use the Holmes-Murphy Event Planning Guide app. You get in the practice of answering those questions that are in the app, and you can email the form to fellow executive board members or committee members, maybe include your chapter advisor or your resource coordinator on those, and have them provide the constructive feedback. So there's no need to implement everything at once, but like I said, baby steps until you can get to a point where you can implement a compliance committee. And, I said earlier it could be 3 to 5 members, but depending on your chapter size, maybe it's 2 to 3 members. But it's still a couple of people who have a diverse perspective and are able to provide that constructive feedback. So you all can have your events and have them within the risk management policies, but also be able to have fun and effectively execute them.
All right, and we'll go ahead and move to the next question. My chapter has never been investigated or in trouble with our university. So do we have to implement the things you've talked about today? Is there really any benefit?
This is Carrie, and just because you haven't been investigated, which, first of all, that's a good thing, that you're not on the university's radar or on the Judiciary Committee's radar, but it's, again, always good to be proactive in these types of situations. You want to be able to keep your name from being on the topic of those university officials, on the tip of their tongues. So you can then go, if something did happen to you, if you could say, hey, look, we did all of these things. It's only going to help you by being proactive versus just having to react and deal with things. I can't stress enough, whether it's AK-Psi or just life in general, trying to be proactive about things is way better than having to react and scramble later. Making sure you have your ducks in a row is better than finding out later that they were kind of all over the place and that you didn't try.
Liz, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Sure. Carrie covered it pretty well, but another thing I wanted to add is there's always room for improvement. So we're never perfect, so there's always the opportunity for us to look deeper into what we're doing, whether it's events or our policies or the way we conduct our pledge program, and to examine what you guys are really doing, because sometimes we get complacent and the same thing is done year in and year out and you don't know any different. But sometimes if you reflect and you think about why are we really doing this and how does this align with our vision, how does this align with our values, you might find that maybe there's something that hasn't been in compliance all this time. You just are, it just hasn't come up to the surface and no one's found out about it. So take that opportunity to be proactive. As Carrie talked about earlier with the financial surcharges, it's cheaper, it's significantly cheaper to be proactive with risk reduction than it is to be reactive. Being reactive is very expensive. So for your wallet's sake and, for sanity's sake, try to be a little more proactive and reflective about what you're doing, because in the long run it will definitely turn out better for the chapter.
All right, moving on. I'd like to do some of these things with my chapter, but I don't think they would take it seriously. What tips do you have for implementing these changes?
Liz, I'll let you take that one.
Okay. So sadly, there are plenty of cases out here from the last few years that demonstrate why our chapter should be taking risk reduction seriously. It's unfortunate, and I know we've all heard about it, but as I said earlier, it only takes one person to stand up or to say something that could drastically change the outcome of a situation for the better. The financial implications of an investigation can be hefty, so that can often be a deterrent. If you want to talk to your chapter about why it's important to to be proactive and to implement risk reduction measures. I know when I was a college student, money wasn't growing on trees, so I had to be careful with, how much I spent and budgeted, and that included my dues for AKSI. But if I had a $120 insurance surcharge, that probably wasn't going to be the best option to, get in trouble. But also, risk reduction doesn't mean you can't have fun. So I know it's a serious topic. It's never fun to talk about, but it doesn't mean you can't have fun. It means that you've thought about it, you've put measures in place to protect your members and your pledges. I was thinking of an example earlier. Can you imagine spending months and months and months planning a large event, inviting your alumni, spending thousands of dollars on an event, only to have the memories clouded and shaded over by one of your brothers being rushed to the emergency room because they drank too much and no one said anything, or they wandered off and were injured and no one knew where they were? So I definitely think that it's a big opportunity for you if you feel that it's important and you're compelled to speak to your executive board, maybe your chapter advisor and your regional management team. I mean, you could talk to me, you could talk to your resource coordinator, you could talk to the Judiciary Committee, because we're all willing to help and support. It's like we've been saying, it's easier to be proactive than it is to be reactive. So you don't have to go at it alone. It is a big topic, and sometimes it's a big change for chapters to adjust their operations. But just starting that conversation is going to be a big difference, because even though you might think that no one else feels the same way as you do, oftentimes there's a false consensus about it, that you think you're the only one who feels that risk reduction might be important and we need to take a serious step in protecting our members, but it's likely that there's a few other people in the room who feel the same way that you do. So let us know what we can do to help.
Yep, and this is Carrie, and just to kind of tag on to what Liz said, is a lot of times from the Judicial Committee standpoint, if we do have to go in and do an investigation, after the fact we find out that there's that unspoken group of people that were like, well, if we'd only known, or we wanted to say something but we were afraid. I can't tell you how many times I've gone in and found that that's the case. So don't be afraid to step up. It's not always the easiest thing to do, I understand that, but definitely speak up and say, hey, this is important. Our chapter's been here for however many years. I know some chapters, they've been around 50 to 60 years, and they want to continue that legacy, as do all of us. But, we need to change how we're doing things to continue, because the environment is different, now than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So that's always one of the things. Don't be afraid to say anything. If you're not comfortable going to your leadership in the chapter, again, like I can't echo enough of what Liz says. Talk to your resource coordinator, talk to your regional management team, your RD, reach out to Liz, any of the members on the Judiciary Committee. We're all here to help, because when we go in and do investigations, that's the last resort. We would much rather it be a proactive, positive thing to change things ahead of time before it gets to a point where we do have to come in and do an investigation, which, the ultimate outcome that we look to avoid is closing chapters. But Unfortunately, it has happened in the past, but that's the last thing that we want to do. We'd much rather talk with you and help you out to begin with and get everything set on the right track to begin with versus having to come in and have that reactive aspect of things.
Well, thank you guys. Those are all the questions we have right now. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to add?
I don't. Again, if there's any questions or concerns, just contact us or your regional management team, Heritage Center.
And I echo what Carrie has said. We're here to serve you. We're here to serve as a resource to all of you and support and coach and guidance. So anytime you need anything, please don't hesitate to contact us. That's what we're here for. We're here to serve you. So look forward to hearing from you.
Well, for our viewers, for any follow-up questions or conversation about the program, please contact education@aksci.org. And again, I'd like to thank Liz and Carrie for the insight and expertise in answering those questions. And thank you guys again for joining us.